10 Stoic Habits to Build an Unbreakable Positive Mental Attitude. There is a kind of person who walks through chaos and remains untouched. Life throws betrayal, loss, failure, and humiliation at them, and somehow they stand taller afterward. You have seen them. Maybe you have envied them. What separates them from everyone else is not luck, wealth, or good genetics. It is a mind trained like a weapon, sharpened by discipline, and protected by ancient habits that most people have forgotten how to practice. The Stoics of Rome and Greece, men who buried their children, lost their fortunes, and stared down emperors, built minds so resilient that nothing external could break them. Today, you are going to learn exactly how they did it. Before we begin, if you want more content like this delivered straight to you, make sure you subscribe to this channel. This is where ancient wisdom meets modern struggle, and where you will find the tools to build a mind that cannot be shaken. What you are about to read is not theory. It is a working manual. 10 habits, drawn from the deepest wells of Stoic philosophy, that when practiced daily will forge in you a positive mental attitude that survives contact with reality. Not blind optimism, not denial, something far stronger, a calm, grounded strength that bends without breaking. These 10 habits were not invented in comfort. They were forged by people who buried children, endured exile, faced execution, and governed empires under the weight of plague and war. Epictetus taught from the position of a former slave. Seneca wrote his most composed letters while facing the very real threat of imperial execution. Marcus Aurelius governed the most powerful empire on earth while privately doubting himself in the pages of a journal never meant for publication. None of them had the luxury of theoretical philosophy detached from real stakes. Every principle you are about to read was tested against genuine hardship long before it became a quote on a page. That is what separates Stoic wisdom from the shallow positivity that floods modern self-help. This is not about forcing a smile or repeating affirmations until you believe them. It is about building, brick by brick, an internal structure so sound that external chaos cannot topple it. Let us begin. Habit 1. Control what is yours, release what is not. Epictetus, a man born into slavery who became one of history's greatest philosophers, opened his teachings with a single, devastating truth. Some things are within our control, and some things are not. Our opinions, our desires, our reactions, these belong to us. Our reputation, other people's actions, the weather, the outcome of events we cannot dictate, these do not. Most human suffering, he argued, comes from confusing the two. We rage at traffic. We despair over what strangers think. We exhaust ourselves trying to control outcomes that were never ours to control in the first place. The Stoic habit here is a daily sorting exercise. When something disturbs you, stop and ask one question: is this within my power? If it is not, release your grip immediately. Not because you do not care, but because gripping tighter changes nothing except your own peace of mind. If it is within your power, then act decisively, without hesitation, without wasting energy on complaint. This single habit, practiced consistently, eliminates the majority of anxiety in a person's life. Think about how much mental energy you spend today on things you cannot change, other people's opinions of you, decisions made in the past, outcomes still unknown. Imagine reclaiming that energy. Imagine directing it entirely toward what you can actually influence: your effort, your attitude, your next action. This is where the unbreakable mind begins, not with control over the world, but with radical clarity about what was never yours to control. Consider how this played out in Epictetus's own life. He was born a slave, and his body was permanently damaged by a master who was said to have broken his leg. He had every reason to be consumed by bitterness toward circumstances entirely outside his control. Instead, he built an entire philosophy around the discovery that his captors could chain his body but never his judgment, his will, or his capacity to choose how he interpreted his suffering. That distinction became the seed of everything Stoicism would later become. If a man in literal chains could locate freedom in his own mind, the excuses most of us carry about our far milder circumstances begin to look considerably thinner. Apply this to something as ordinary as a difficult coworker or a critical family member. You cannot control what they say about you, how they treat you, or whether they ever change. What you can control is whether you respond with reactivity or composure, whether you let their words dictate your mood for the rest of the day, and whether you continue showing up as the person you intend to be regardless of their behavior. This is not passivity. It is the most active form of self-ownership available to a human being. refusing to hand the steering wheel of your emotional state to people and events that were never entitled to it in the first place. Habit 2. Rehearse adversity before it arrives. The Stoics practiced something called premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. Seneca wrote letters to his friends encouraging them to imagine, in vivid detail, the loss of their wealth, their health, even their loved ones. This was not pessimism, it was inoculation. By mentally rehearsing hardship before it strikes, the mind builds calluses. When misfortune eventually arrives, as it does for everyone, it finds a person who has already walked through the scenario 100 times in their imagination. Modern psychology has caught up to this ancient practice and calls it defensive pessimism or stress inoculation training. Athletes visualize failure so that when it happens in competition, they do not freeze. Soldiers rehearse worst-case scenarios so combat does not paralyze them. The Stoics understood this over 2,000 years ago, applying it not just to physical danger but to the ordinary hardships of daily life. Job loss, betrayal, illness, embarrassment. The habit is simple but uncomfortable. Spend a few minutes each week imagining the loss of something you value. Picture it clearly. Sit with the discomfort. Then return to the present moment, where that thing is still yours, and notice how much more grateful you feel. This practice does two things simultaneously. It prepares you for hardship so it never catches you completely unguarded, and it deepens your appreciation for what you currently have. A mind that has rehearsed loss is a mind that cannot be blindsided by it. There is a second layer to this practice that most people overlook. Premeditation is not only about disaster, it is about friction. Before an important meeting, imagine that it goes poorly. Before a difficult conversation, imagine the other person reacting with hostility. Before a long journey, imagine delays and inconveniences. This is not pessimism dragging you down. It is a rehearsal that removes the element of shock. When the delay happens, when the meeting goes sideways, when the conversation turns tense, you are not blindsided. You already walked through it in your mind, and your nervous system already knows how to respond calmly because it has, in a sense, been there before. Seneca took this further than almost anyone in the ancient world. In his letters to Aurelius, he described imagining exile, poverty, and even the death of loved ones, not to summon despair, but to strip these outcomes of their power to terrify. Fear, he argued, does far more damage than the actual events we fear. Most of what we dread never even happens, and yet we pay the emotional cost of it in advance, over and over, every time we imagine it with dread instead of preparation. Premeditation converts that same mental rehearsal from a source of anxiety into a source of readiness. The event is identical. The only thing that changes is whether your mind approaches it as a threat or as a scenario it has already, calmly, worked through. If this is resonating with you, take a second to subscribe. We are only getting started, and the next habits go even deeper into the architecture of an unshakable mind. Habit 3. Judge events, not reactions to events. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor who ruled Rome while battling plagues, wars, and betrayal from his own family, wrote a phrase that has echoed through the centuries. It is not events that disturb people, but their judgments about events. Two people can experience the exact same circumstance, a job loss, a public failure, a broken relationship, and walk away with entirely different internal experiences. The event itself is neutral. It is the story we tell about the event that determines whether we suffer or endure. This is one of the hardest habits to build because our judgments happen instantly, automatically, often before we are even aware of them. Something happens, and within a fraction of a second, our mind has already labeled it as catastrophic, unfair, or ruinous. The Stoic practice is to insert a pause between the event and the judgment, to catch yourself in the act of interpreting, and ask whether that interpretation is the only possible one, or even the most useful one. Practically, this looks like reframing. Instead of, "This is a disaster," you train yourself to ask, "What does this situation actually require of me right now?" Instead of, "I have been ruined," you ask, "What remains available to me despite this loss?" This is not toxic positivity. It is precision thinking. The Stoics were relentless realists. They did not pretend hardship was good. They simply refused to add unnecessary suffering on top of necessary difficulty. Master this habit, and you gain the ability to separate the sting of a situation from the meaning you assign to it, which is where your real power always lived. Marcus Aurelius wrote Meditations not as a public philosophy text but as a private notebook, arguing with himself in the middle of one of the most demanding jobs in the ancient world. He faced a devastating plague that killed millions, wars on multiple fronts, and a trusted general who attempted to seize his throne. In the passages where he wrestles with betrayal, you can watch him actively practicing this habit in real time, reminding himself that the betrayer's actions belong to the betrayer, and that his own judgment about the event is the only part he actually controls. He does not pretend the betrayal did not hurt. He simply refuses to let his interpretation of it spiral beyond what the facts actually require. This habit becomes especially powerful when applied to comparison, one of the most common sources of modern suffering. Seeing someone else's success is a neutral event. The judgment, they have something I lack, and that means I am behind, is what actually produces the sting. Catch that judgment as it forms. Ask whether it is accurate, whether it is useful, and whether a different interpretation, such as, their success shows me what is possible, might serve you better while remaining just as honest. Over time, this becomes less about forcing positivity and more about simply refusing to let your mind default to the most catastrophic possible interpretation of every event that happens to you. Habit 4. Practice voluntary discomfort. Seneca advised his students to set aside a certain number of days each month to practice poverty deliberately. Eat the plainest food, wear the coarsest clothing. Ask yourself honestly, is this the condition I feared? The purpose was not self-punishment. It was truth. By voluntarily experiencing minor hardship, a person discovers firsthand that the things they fear losing are far more survivable than their anxious imagination suggests. We live in an age engineered for comfort. Every inconvenience has been optimized away. Food delivered in minutes, entertainment on demand, climate control at the touch of a button. This comfort, while pleasant, has quietly eroded our resilience. Small inconveniences now feel like emergencies. A delayed flight, a cold shower, a missed meal, these register in the modern mind as crises, when historically they were simply Tuesday. The Stoic habit is to reintroduce controlled discomfort on your own terms. Take cold showers. Skip a meal occasionally. Walk instead of drive when you could. Sleep on the floor for a night. These are not extreme feats of asceticism. They are small, deliberate reminders that you are more capable of enduring difficulty than modern comfort has led you to believe. Each time you voluntarily choose discomfort and come out the other side unharmed, you weaken fear's grip on your decision-making. You begin to realize that the worst-case scenario you have been avoiding is not nearly as unbearable as you assume. This is how an unbreakable mental attitude gets built, not through avoiding hardship, but through repeatedly proving to yourself that you can survive it. There is a deeper strategic reason behind this habit beyond mere toughness. Comfort, left unchecked, quietly raises the threshold at which we consider ourselves to be suffering. A person accustomed to constant convenience begins to experience mild inconvenience as genuine hardship. This lowers their overall resilience and makes them more fragile in the face of real adversity. Voluntary discomfort resets that threshold. It recalibrates the mind to understand what actual difficulty feels like, so that ordinary friction, a delayed train, an uncomfortable conversation, a demanding week at work, no longer registers as a crisis. There is also a financial and psychological freedom hidden inside this practice that Musonius Rufus, one of Epictetus's own teachers, wrote about extensively. A person who has trained themselves to be comfortable with less becomes far less controllable by fear of loss. They negotiate from a position of strength because they are not terrified of the outcome if the negotiation fails. They take risks that timid, comfort-dependent people avoid, because they have already proven to themselves that scarcity is survivable. This is why so many of history's most resilient figures deliberately practiced simplicity even when they could easily have afforded luxury, not out of poverty, but out of a desire to remain free from comfort's quiet, corrosive grip on their courage. Habit 5. Focus entirely on the present action. Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself, in what would become Meditations, that a person should concentrate every thought on the task directly in front of them, as if it might be their last act on earth. This was not morbid, it was a call to total presence. The Stoics understood that the mind's tendency to wander into the past, replaying old wounds, or into the future, rehearsing anxieties, was the single greatest thief of both peace and performance. Consider how much of your daily suffering exists only in your head, disconnected from what is actually happening in front of you. You are washing dishes, but your mind is reliving an argument from 3 days ago. You are having dinner with your family, but your mind is spiraling about a deadline next week. The present moment, the only place where life actually happens, gets abandoned in favor of mental time travel that accomplishes nothing except generating unnecessary distress. The habit here is deceptively simple. When you catch your mind drifting into rumination or anxiety, gently return your full attention to the task at hand. Not through force, but through repetition. Notice the drift. Return to the present. Notice again. Return again. Over time, this becomes less effortful and more automatic. A mind anchored in the present cannot be dragged backward by regret or forward by fear. It simply does the next right action, fully, and then the next one after that. This singular focus is why the Stoics could function with clarity even in the middle of plagues, wars, and political collapse. Their attention stayed exactly where it needed to be. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that even if he lived 3,000 years, or 10 times that, he could never lose any life except the one he was currently living, and could never live any life except the one he was currently losing moment by moment. In other words, the present is the only currency any of us actually possess. The past is a memory, reconstructed and often distorted every time we revisit it. The future is a prediction, frequently wrong, built from fears that rarely materialize exactly as imagined. The present moment is the only place where actual, verifiable life is occurring, and yet it is the place most people spend the least time actually inhabiting. This habit compounds powerfully with the first one on this list. Once you have sorted what is and is not within your control, the present moment becomes the only remaining battlefield, because it is the only place where your control actually operates. You cannot act in the past. You cannot act in the future. You can only ever act now. Athletes describe this state as flow, total absorption in the present task, where self-consciousness and anxiety dissolve because there is no spare attention left for them. The Stoics did not have the word flow, but they were describing the exact same phenomenon, and they understood it was not reserved for elite performers. It was available to anyone willing to keep returning their attention, again and again, to the one moment they were actually alive. And if you are finding real value in these habits, hit that subscribe button now. We have 5 more to go, and they get even more transformative from here. Habit 6. View obstacles as the way forward. Marcus Aurelius left behind one of the most quoted lines in all of Stoic philosophy. The impediment to action advances action, and what stands in the way becomes the way. This is not a clever turn of phrase. It is a complete reversal of how most people relate to obstacles. The default human response to difficulty is resistance, frustration, and the wish that the obstacle simply did not exist. The Stoic response is radically different. The obstacle is not blocking the path, the obstacle is the path. This reframe changes everything about how a person moves through hardship. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" the Stoic asks, "What does this obstacle make possible that would not have existed otherwise?" A setback at work forces the development of a new skill. A broken relationship clears space for growth that comfort would never have demanded. A physical injury builds patience and discipline that ease could never teach. The obstacle, examined closely, often contains the exact material needed for the next stage of growth. This does not mean pretending obstacles are pleasant. It means refusing to see them as pure loss. The habit is to actively search, in every setback, for the opportunity hidden inside it. Ask what this difficulty is teaching you, what strength it is forcing you to develop, what door it might be closing so that a better one can open. This is not naive optimism. It is strategic reframing, and it is one of the most powerful tools ever developed for maintaining a positive mental attitude under real pressure. When obstacles become fuel instead of roadblocks, nothing life throws at you can permanently derail your progress. History offers a striking example in the story of a Roman general blocked by hostile terrain during a campaign. Rather than seeing the treacherous ground as a defeat, he used it defensively, turning the very obstacle his enemy hoped would stop him into a natural fortification that protected his own position. This exact pattern shows up constantly once you start looking for it. A cancelled opportunity forces a person into an entirely different path that ends up suiting them better than the original plan ever would have. An injury forces an athlete to develop mental discipline that eventually outlasts their physical decline. A financial setback forces a level of resourcefulness that comfort would never have demanded. None of this works as denial. The Stoics were not telling themselves comforting lies about how obstacles feel in the moment. They are often genuinely painful, frustrating, and unwelcome. The habit is not to feel nothing about the obstacle, it is to refuse to stop at the feeling. After acknowledging the difficulty honestly, the mind moves immediately to the next question. Given that this is now the situation, what is the most useful thing I can extract or build from it? This forward-moving posture is what separates resilience from mere endurance. Endurance simply survives the obstacle. Resilience uses it as raw material. Habit 7. Guard your mind like a fortress. The Stoics treated the mind as sacred territory, something to be defended as carefully as a city under siege. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself constantly that no external force could actually harm his inner citadel unless he gave it permission to enter. Insults, criticism, betrayal, even physical suffering, none of these could touch the core of a well-trained mind unless that mind chose to let them in and set up residence there. This habit requires constant vigilance over what you allow to occupy your thoughts. In the ancient world, this meant guarding against gossip, flattery, and the corrupting influence of a decadent society. In the modern world, it means being deliberate about what you consume, the news you read, the social media you scroll, the conversations you engage in, the company you keep. Every input shapes the terrain of your inner citadel. Fill it with noise, negativity, and comparison, and your fortress will feel like a battlefield. Fill it with wisdom, discipline, and intentional thought, and it becomes an unshakable stronghold. Practically, this means auditing your inputs regularly. Notice what conversations leave you feeling drained versus energized. Notice which media leaves you anxious versus informed. The goal is not isolation from the world, but discernment about what you let inside the walls. A fortress with open gates is not a fortress at all. The Stoics were not hermits. They were engaged citizens, statesmen, and teachers. But they were selective, deliberate, and protective of their inner world, because they understood that a compromised mind cannot generate a positive, resilient attitude no matter how good external circumstances become. Marcus Aurelius described this inner citadel as a place no army could storm and no enemy could occupy without the owner's own permission. This is a remarkable claim for a man who ruled during a genuine military crisis, surrounded by real threats on every border of the empire. He understood that his throne, his health, even his life could be taken from him by forces entirely outside his control. But his judgment, his character, his internal composure, these remained his alone, defensible against every external siege, as long as he did not personally hand them over. Modern life makes this habit both more difficult and more necessary than it has ever been. In the ancient world, the volume of external input a person absorbed in a single day was a fraction of what most people now consume before breakfast. Notifications, headlines, comment sections, and algorithmically amplified outrage are all specifically engineered to breach the walls of your inner citadel and take up permanent residence in your attention. The habit of guarding your mind today requires active, ongoing maintenance, deciding in advance what earns entry, setting boundaries around consumption, and regularly clearing out whatever has slipped past the gates and begun eroding your composure from the inside. Habit 8. Practice daily reflection without mercy or cruelty. Seneca described a nightly ritual passed down from his teacher Sextius. At the end of each day, before sleep, review your actions honestly. Where did you fall short of your own standards? Where did you act with courage or discipline? This was not an exercise in self-punishment, nor was it an exercise in flattery. It was clear-eyed accounting, done with the same detachment a judge might apply to a stranger's case. Most people avoid this kind of reflection because it feels uncomfortable, or they swing to the opposite extreme, engaging in relentless self-criticism that leaves them feeling worse rather than wiser. The Stoic method threads the needle. You are neither your own harshest enemy nor your own indulgent defender. You are a fair witness to your own conduct, someone who can say plainly, I lost my temper today, and here is what I will do differently tomorrow, without spiraling into shame or excusing the behavior entirely. The habit is to set aside a few minutes each evening for this practice. Ask yourself 3 questions. What did I do well today? Where did I fall short? And what will I adjust moving forward? Write it down if possible. The act of writing forces honesty that the wandering mind often avoids. Over weeks and months, this simple ritual compounds into extraordinary self-awareness. You begin to notice your own patterns, your own triggers, your own blind spots, long before they cause serious damage. A mind that reflects honestly, without cruelty, becomes a mind that improves consistently. This is the quiet engine behind every Stoic's steady, positive resilience. What made this practice so powerful for Seneca was its consistency, not its intensity. He was not seeking a dramatic confession or a single breakthrough insight each night. He was building a habit of small, honest corrections, applied daily, the same way a sculptor removes a little material at a time rather than attempting to carve the entire form in one motion. Small daily corrections, repeated for years, produce a level of self-mastery that no single dramatic effort ever could. This is precisely why journaling and nightly reflection appear again and again across every tradition of disciplined self-improvement, from ancient Rome to modern elite performance coaching. There is also a subtle psychological benefit to this ritual that goes beyond self-improvement. The simple act of closing out each day with intentional reflection, rather than letting it dissolve unexamined into sleep, creates a sense of ownership over your own life. Days stop blurring together into an undifferentiated blur of reaction and habit. Each one becomes a distinct unit with its own lessons, its own small victories, its own specific areas for growth. Over a year, this adds up to 52 weeks of documented self-knowledge, which very few people in the modern world ever bother to accumulate about themselves. Quick reminder before we move into the final habits: subscribing to this channel means you will never miss the next piece of ancient wisdom applied to modern life. If you have found value here, now is the moment to join. Habit 9. Remember the shortness of life. The Stoics were obsessed with mortality, not out of morbidity, but out of urgency. Seneca wrote that it is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily that he could leave this life at any moment, and that this fact should shape how he thought, acted, and treated others. This awareness of death, far from being depressing, was one of the most energizing forces in Stoic philosophy. Consider how differently you would act today if you truly internalized that your time is finite and unknown in length. Petty grudges would lose their grip. Procrastination would feel absurd. The urge to waste hours on things that do not matter would weaken considerably, replaced by an urgency to pursue what actually matters: relationships, growth, meaningful work, courage in the moments that count. This is the gift hidden inside mortality awareness. It strips away illusion and forces clarity about priorities. The habit is to regularly, deliberately, contemplate the fact that your time is limited, not in a way that produces anxiety, but in a way that produces focus. Some Stoics carried physical reminders: a skull on a desk, a phrase inscribed on a ring. You do not need anything so dramatic. A simple pause, a few times a week, to ask yourself, if this were among my final days, would I be spending it this way, is enough to recalibrate your choices. This habit does not make life feel shorter. It makes life feel more vivid, more urgent, and more deliberately lived. An unbreakable positive attitude is built on top of this clarity, because a person who values their time rarely wastes it on despair. Seneca dedicated an entire essay to this idea, arguing that life is long enough for anyone who uses it well, and that the common complaint about time being too short is almost always a disguised complaint about time being wasted. He pointed to the countless hours people surrender to idle distraction, unnecessary anxiety, and other people's demands, and asked what might be possible if even a fraction of that time were reclaimed and redirected toward what actually mattered. His argument was not that people needed more time. It was that they needed to stop squandering the time they already had. This awareness also transforms how a person relates to setbacks and grievances. Grudges require an assumption of unlimited time, the idea that there will always be another day to remain angry, another year to postpone reconciliation, another decade to put off the conversation that matters. Mortality awareness dismantles this assumption. It asks, uncomfortably but usefully, whether the grudge, the delay, or the avoidance is really how you want to spend a portion of a life that has a definite, unknown ending. This is not about living in constant fear of death. It is about using the certainty of death as a filter that clarifies exactly what deserves your finite attention and what does not. Habit 10. Act with virtue regardless of outcome. The final and most foundational Stoic habit is this: act rightly, and let the outcome fall where it may. The Stoics believed that virtue, wisdom, courage, justice, and self-discipline was the only true good, and that external outcomes, however desirable, were ultimately outside a person's control. This did not mean outcomes did not matter. It meant that a person's worth and peace of mind could never be allowed to depend entirely on them. This habit liberates a person from the exhausting cycle of measuring their self-worth by results they cannot fully control. You can work with total discipline and still lose the job. You can love someone with total honesty and still lose the relationship. You can train relentlessly and still lose the competition. If your peace depends entirely on winning, you will spend your life at the mercy of forces beyond your control. But if your peace depends on having acted with integrity, discipline, and courage, then no external result can strip that peace away from you. The practice is to shift your internal scoreboard. Instead of asking only, "Did I win?" ask, Did I act with virtue? Instead of measuring your day purely by results, measure it by whether you showed up with discipline, honesty, and courage regardless of what followed. This is the deepest root of Stoic resilience, the habit that all the others ultimately serve. When your identity is built on your character rather than your circumstances, you become genuinely unbreakable, not because bad things stop happening, but because your worth was never tied to them in the first place. The Stoics used an image of an archer to explain this principle. An archer trains diligently, aims carefully, and releases the arrow with proper form and full effort. Once the arrow leaves the bow, a gust of wind can still carry it off target. The archer's job was never to guarantee the wind's cooperation. It was only ever to aim and release with full skill and integrity. Judging the archer by the wind's behavior would be absurd. Yet this is exactly how most people judge themselves every day, treating outcomes entirely outside their control as verdicts on their own worth and competence. This final habit is what allows a person to fail publicly, lose significant things, and still walk away with their sense of self intact. It is what allowed Roman statesmen to be exiled, stripped of wealth, and separated from their families, and still write some of history's most composed and even joyful philosophical letters from that exile. Their circumstances had collapsed completely. Their character had not moved an inch. This is the ultimate expression of an unbreakable positive mental attitude. Not immunity to hardship, but a foundation so solid that hardship simply cannot reach the part of you that actually matters. Bringing it all together, 10 habits, each one a tool passed down from minds that endured exile, war, betrayal, plague, and loss, and emerged with their inner peace intact. Control what is yours and release the rest. Rehearse hardship before it arrives. Judge events with precision, not panic. Choose discomfort deliberately. Stay anchored in the present. Treat obstacles as fuel. Guard your mind like sacred ground. Reflect honestly each night. Remember that your time is finite. And above all, act with virtue and let outcomes take care of themselves. None of these habits are easy. None of them offer instant transformation. But practiced daily, consistently, without demanding perfection of yourself, they compound into something extraordinary, a mind that can walk through fire and come out calmer, clearer, and stronger than before. This is not the positivity of denial. It is the positivity of a person who has looked directly at hardship and built the internal architecture to meet it without flinching. If this resonated with you, the single best thing you can do right now is subscribe to this channel. Every video here is built to give you tools like these, practical, ancient, battle-tested wisdom for building a mind that nothing can break. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. Leave a comment about which habit you are going to start with, and come back for the next piece of this journey. The Stoics did not build unbreakable minds overnight, and neither will you, but every single day you practice these habits is a day closer to becoming the person who cannot be shaken. Subscribe now, and let's keep building that mind together.